86 of Colorado's 100 state lawmakers signed a letter to Governor Hickenlooper this week, stating they have lost faith in the leadership of the Department of Human Services. The letter points to problems in various areas and demands a change in top management, including Executive Director Reggie Bica. Patty, after a full session, 120 days, is a week after that we hear from 86 lawmakers finally seeing bipartisan cooperation on an issue, but a surprising venue to Governor Hickenlooper about this issue. What do you think?
Well, you kind of wonder where these 86 people were for the first 110 days of the session, when they could have brought this up, gotten a lot more attention, maybe made some laws that could have changed it. Auditor Dennis Gallagher went and testified about a bill that would make human services, different counties' human services departments more transparent. So there was some discussion of human services, but nothing that gave it the idea that there was this much dissatisfaction. Certainly when you have 86 people sign a letter, you know, where there's smoke, there's some ire, there's no question. And you have to wonder how Alicia Caldwell is now feeling, because she left that seat to go be the spokesperson for this division. Governor Hickenlooper has said, you know, he stands by it, they're doing investigations, but 86 people signing on, especially when those 86 people would rarely agree on anything, seems pretty substantial.
Well, and they haven't talked to all the other 14 who didn't sign, but at least some of them had said, well, I didn't want to sign the letter, but I want to talk to him myself. So it wasn't like the other 14 had this great vote of confidence for Bica or the department. David, did you find the letter as an odd strategy, or particular because they wanted to aim strictly at Bica?
I think it was a strategy to get attention after a lot of frustration of trying to do things other ways. The legislature did pass a bill to improve the ombudsman's office that inspects that department. Governor Hickenlooper resisted it, and so the change wasn't as powerful as it could have been, but they made some progress on that. In terms of when was the ire raised, Pat Stedman, who is not a Grover Norquist guy who wants to just cut government for its own, you know, for the sake of cutting, back in January, Stedman on the Joint Budget Committee accused Bica of deliberate deceit, where they come in and say for the Department of Youth, for the Youth Corrections facility, oh, can we have some more money because we need to hire some more guards? Oh, okay, maybe you do. And then it comes out, we've already started hiring the guards. And so the Joint Budget Committee, in response to what Stedman called deliberate deceit, said, no, we're not going to give you any money, and they took the money from someplace else. Governor Hickenlooper says, oh, I'm very surprised that in this letter they say, we tried to meet with you, but nobody, we never got through. And Hickenlooper's answer is, oh, gee, I had no idea about that. We've heard that story before. Apparently there's some guy in between the receptionist and the governor, there's some guy whose job is anybody who wants to talk to Hickenlooper about a problem, we're cutting him off. Don't tell John about that. That would get him really angry. We don't want to do that. The broader problem of the Hickenlooper administration is, you know, he's supposed to be a businessman, very competent, all this kind of stuff. He has expanded the government in ways into all these new things that were optional. The health care exchange, which is having all kinds of problems, the huge Medicaid blow to the state budget, without before making sure that the things that Colorado was already doing are being done well and appropriately. This is the safety net for the people who most desperately need it. Adults with profound long-term mental disabilities. Exactly the people that government ought to be there for. And rather than making sure that works, he's running off, starting all these new things.
Eric, what struck me odd is that the lawmakers decided it was going to be this letter because they had 120 days where they weren't bashful about tackling yoga instruction. We had high school mascots were a topic. So obviously there was time to do it, but they waited till a week after the session and then sent this blistering letter. But it had a lot of cooperation. How do you read into it?
Well, I've always heard the phrase of getting 86 from a job. I think it might be apt here. I don't know why they waited and didn't deal with this during the session, but in some ways, if you had dealt with this with 2 or 3 weeks to go into session, it gets somewhat lost in the mix because there's so much else going on. Here, I don't know if it was strategic on their part. I don't know if that amount of calculation went into it. But here, in some ways, and by putting it in writing, which is an unusual step, it's a step that conveys seriousness, it gets more attention, more discussion than it might have if it had just been another part of the legislative flow. I had always heard that Reggie Bika was one of Hickenlooper's favorites, that, if you lined up his 15 or 20 cabinet members, that there's a close link between the two of them, that he's been always near the top of Hickenlooper's list of cabinet members that the governor had a personal relationship with and really valued. I think you see some of that in the defensive reaction, very defensive reaction. There's an appropriate level of defense that a chief executive needs to mount on behalf of an embattled cabinet member. And then there's extra defensiveness, and I think you're starting to see that over the last 24 hours in terms of how the governor's people are reacting to this. I'll be very curious of whether Bika can survive this. My gut tells me he survives it short term. I would be doubtful of whether he survives it long term. Just the strength of the letter, the words used. David mentioned the word deceitful that had been in the letter, intimidation. This is not just a policy disagreement between legislators and the department. This is much more of an attack on the kind of culture that seems, or at least the legislature perceives, exists in the upper levels of that department. You can't get 86 out of 100 legislators to agree on the morning prayer. And the fact that you have 86 out of 100 putting their name to this is powerful.
Todd, the 86 number impressed me as well, because you didn't see them agree, like Eric said, on nearly anything to that degree. But they also called out Governor Hickenlooper with this letter. Not only is it just about the Department of Human Services, but they said, hey, we didn't have a chance to meet with you. And that part seemed a little odd to me, because again, like David said, unless they have some awesome bouncer in front of Governor Hickenlooper's office, that seemed like an odd situation. Out of all the different pieces of this, what's your take?
Well, what you bring up specifically, it's not the biggest part of that letter. It's just a couple of lines. But the idea, as Dave mentioned, that members of both caucuses would have approached the governor and said, we tried to talk to you, but we couldn't get through the door. That's surprising. It looked like I saw Morgan Carroll's name on those signatures. The Post didn't list them out, specifically. But, let's say she did. I would think she would have some line item veto discretion over that letter, and I would try to get something that's personally attacking the governor like that off of that letter. So my take is exactly what you bring up, that other than these allegations that there's a top-down culture driven by fear. Eric talked about some of the strong language. That was the other strong language that jumped out at me, that there's a culture driven by fear in the overall administration of this single department. The other single thing was the fact that they called out the governor saying, we tried to talk to you, but we couldn't. That's something I think the governor will have to address as he moves forward in this, and he can't just do that by sending Alan Salazar out to meet individually with these reps and senators.